Welcome to Cars on Call. This is automotive journalist Steve Schutz. And I made the point many times before, regular listeners know this. This is the only podcast that has a trauma surgeon that has operated on car crash victims and done research on car crashes. So, of course, he's not here.
Well, he might be out researching. We never know.
Dr. Stephan Moran is not available today. He is serving our country, the National Guard. I'm not permitted to say where he is, but he is at an undisclosed location. But Adams, you're here.
Yes, I'm not handling car crash victims, but we'll see what we can do. See what kind of car wreck we can make out of this show tonight.
I got a topic that's been sitting around, and I want to talk about it because I know this is something you have a particular interest in. And, I've always had the thought, Adams, that if you are into cars, and this is true really for anything, if you really think about something a lot, have a passion for it, you can learn a lot about society in general just by knowing about whatever. So, if you are, let's say, into the symphony, or if you're into, art or something like that, or watches, you can learn about society writ large. And that's true for cars. And I'm going to talk about society. I'm going to talk about history. And I'm going to start with a rant. All right, Adams?
I'm ready for the rant. And before I'm going to go ahead and put a minor preface on the rant. Those of us who are car people, let us not think that we are in some sort of tangential world. Oh, you're a car person, everybody else, somebody else. But 80% of American businesses are touched by the automobile business. And so this is a big boulder of information and influence and part of society's fabric. So you go with it.
I have always thought that the car world, and that includes collector cars or car crashes like Stephan talks about and works on, or the new car industry, it reflects society. So here we go. Adams, I'm going to roll.
Go for it.
I am going to make the point that we are in 1974 all over again. 50 years later, we're entering into 1974 in 2024. So to make that point, let me just start. And this occurred to me. And to be fair, a good friend of mine, Tom Snow, who's a retired attorney, wonderful guy, very smart. He sent me this Dan Neal Wall Street Journal article talking about how cars today aren't as good as they were 5 years ago. They're disappointing compared with their predecessors.
Mm-hmm.
And that got me thinking about something even bigger. And that's what I want to get into. And the point I want to make is about 1974. If you think back to 1963 to 1973, cars were awesome. People loved their cars. People were happy. You had muscle cars, the GTO, the Hemi Cuda, the Boss Mustang. You had luxury cars, Buick Riviera, Chrysler Imperial, Cadillac Eldorado. You had some SUVs. They weren't very popular, but people liked them. International Scout, Ford Bronco. You had pickups, Chevy, Dodge, Ford. People were happy. And then, as we all know, 1968, 1969, 1970, times changed. Our society changed.
Yep.
Vietnam War protests, all kinds of great riots. We went through an upheaval, and then people became unhappy. Muscle cars started to die. And here's why. Muscle cars plus teenagers equals accidents, trauma, deaths.
Yep.
And insurance rates went up as a result of that.
Yep.
And I would say that because of the Vietnam War and a lot of young people dying, a lot of parents and a lot of society said, hey, we don't want people dying in their muscle cars. We don't want young people dying in their muscle cars.
And that was kind of newsy at the time. It's hard to even think back. But I mean, street racing, although it's had a horrific resurgence, street racing back then, people were doing that and people were dying, and cars were very unsafe back then. And let's not, you're probably going to cover this, but let's not leave out that the EPA was starting to wag its very powerful index finger.
And I was about to say that, and that's exactly right. So as people were unhappy about young people in muscle cars, whereas 1965, they had a GTO, it was all good. 1970, it wasn't all good.
Mm-hmm.
Silent Spring, we all remember that book. the environmental movement, because of, and I lived in New York at this time, obvious pollution, smog in LA, smog in New York, uh, terrible pollution in the East River, Boston Harbor, the Cuyahoga River in Cincinnati caught on fire because of pollution. Pollution was real back then. And that prompted what you just talked about, which is the EPA. You remember this, Adams? Give a hoot, don't pollute. Remember that bumper sticker?
Right. So yeah, with the owl. Yeah, absolutely.
So as a result, this unhappiness led to, I would call, a period of chaos. And that was 1974 to 1984. And basically, society in America said, when it comes to cars, we don't know what we want. We know what we don't want, but we don't know what we want. We don't want muscle cars. We don't want big luxury barges. We don't want pollution, and we don't want bad gas mileage. By the way, OPEC embargo came 1974.
Yep.
Rise, this is chaos, okay? Rise of the tinny shitbox, Volkswagen Beetle, Toyota Corolla, Datsun B210. That's what they were called. They were good cars, but they were small and they kind of were shitboxes. They were not very safe. Death of the muscle cars, death of the large American luxury vehicle, death of the SUV. And we got some weird cars, Adams. AMC Pacer, AMC Gremlin, Ford Pinto, Chevy Vega, Dodge Challenger made by Mitsubishi, front-wheel drive. What? It was a Mitsubishi Sapporo, 178 horsepower Corvette, Subaru Brat, DeLorean. Those are just some of the weird cars.
And let's not forget the Mustang 2 snuck in there. And people,
yes,
I remember super well having gotten my license in or around this period, which was a big rite of passage just to get it.
Yeah.
No one ever knew what fuel economy they got until the embargo and OPEC got on the scene. And then everybody's talking about gas mileage. It is such a big social deal, not just among car people, but everybody who had a car was talking about it. They were up in arms about this big change.
And yeah, thank you for saying that, because 1968, nobody mentioned gas much because gas was, 30 cents a gallon, and it went up. Do you remember when they had to switch the gas pumps because they couldn't go over $1 a gallon? The pumps wouldn't work.
Yeah.
So they had to change the pumps.
Yep.
And for anyone listening who wasn't not old enough, not only did they have to change the pumps because dollar was, they had to change it because the pumps literally could not calculate $1 a gallon. So they sold, you remember this? They sold gas by the half gallon.
Oh, I had forgotten that they did. And then
52 cents for half gallon.
And folks, I mean, we cannot paint, or Steve cannot paint this picture fiery enough to just know the ripple effect and then the tsunami effect that was going on at the time. And it was all happening almost simultaneously. It came so quickly. There wasn't a big bellwether event that we said, oh, this is gonna come. It was like, bang, it was all here, and it was in triplicate. They talked about the perfect storm, and there were gas rationing. People were lined up in the street because they had their day to get fuel, and other people had their day to get fuel. It was really, you've said the word chaos, but that's what a lot of this was.
Gas lines. Thank you for another thing, by the way. If you had an even number on the last number of your license plate, you would get gas Tuesday, Thursday, and I think Saturday. If you have an odd number, it was Monday, Wednesday, Friday. That was a thing. So then you had the privilege when it was your day to wait for an hour online.
Yep.
I guess I should say inline because
inline.
No online.
Yeah, we didn't have an online.
I always say, New Yorkers always say you wait online. It's like what you do. And now it has a different connotation.
Only waiting an hour sounds like good news to a Tesla owner, but we'll get to that.
We are going to get to that. And then things changed after 10 years of chaos, 1984 to 1994. Now we know what we want. It's like literally everyone just said, okay, we know what we want when it comes to cars. We want Japanese quality and we want German driving handling. That's what we want. We want German driving feel. And everybody's like, that's it. It's over. That's what we want. Mercedes E-Class, S-Class, SL, BMW 5 Series, 3 Series went over sticker. They were sold out. You had to wait to get one. Absolutely incredible how those cars became hot. Honda Accord, Honda Civic, Toyota Corolla, and Camry. People just All they wanted were those cars. And there was actually a bribery scandal where dealers who had, Honda dealers and Acura dealers were paying executives at Honda of North America to give them increased allocations. I remember one executive at Honda of North America got a pool put in his backyard by a dealer. Some of those guys, I don't know if anyone went to jail, Adams, but pretty nasty shenanigans.
In nasty shenanigans, people were brokering entire shiploads of Japanese cars. They were headed to the East Coast. Somebody on the West Coast would outbid them. If they were headed to some obscure little Polynesian island or wherever they were going to be dropping off a few cars, somebody would outbid them. It was ridiculous. The Japanese car was absolute gold.
Yeah, and so were the Germans. So, and
Yeah.
of course, the birth of Acura, Infiniti, and Lexus. So that's kind of what happened there. And then from 1994 to, I would say, to 2024, kind of 30 years, everyone's like, okay, there was evolution, but it was neither everyone's totally happy. They were pretty happy, but not where we are now, which is people are basically pissed off and not happy. A
Yep.
lot of dissatisfaction in 2024. So it's not cars are awesome, but cars are really good. People are happy. We did have muscle cars, by the way, Mercedes AMG, E55, E63, BMW M3, M5, Audi RS5. We had a lot of, it was like for German muscle cars, we had a real golden age, and that would be 15 years ago, 10 years ago, even 5 years ago.
Yep.
Nice SUVs emerged. This is new, but again, same kind of thing. Big luxury vehicles, Cadillac Escalade, Lincoln Navigator, Mercedes GLS, Porsche Cayenne, Porsche Macan.
And let's not leave out of that performance renaissance, the Mustang GT waving the American flag high and mighty, because they were absolutely clomping along, and that was like the everyman's performance car.
Corvettes did well. Challenger Hellcats, all part of that. Yes. Ultra luxury was born, but again, it's part of the same kind of thing. Bentley, Rolls-Royce, Range Rover, Lamborghini, Ferrari, all set records in the last 10 years. Pickups did really well. Nice pickups, F-150 Platinum, Ram, Tungsten. People have been generally happy, but now times are changing again. And that's why I think we're not happy. We have increasingly important virtual lives. This is a big thing now. Since the iPhone, we have increased the time we spend with virtual friends. It used to be letters and think of people you went to high school with, letters and the occasional phone call. Now it's frequent contact through social media on your phone. And we are increasingly, and this is important, Adams, I want to emphasize this, we're increasingly broadcasting our lives. You see so many people broadcasting their most personal thoughts and experiences on TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, not you could say OnlyFans, but you know what I'm saying? I mean, people are bearing their bodies and souls and experiences in a way they never did before. All of that takes our attention away from driving cars. We don't want to drive. We want to be on our phones. That's a big change. Driving is less desirable. People want to consume and they want to produce content. And there's a general desire to put less CO2 out. So kind of like the EPA, now it's kind of the same thing. CO2 is bad. People don't want to do it. The environment movement has traction. So I think, and I'll start closing here, 2024 to 2034 is going to be a period of chaos. And here are the signs. The rise of eco cars and decreased CO2 in the form of BEVs. And people, I just saw a headline, and I know you're going to talk about this. Automotive News from McKinsey study said 40% of people who have a BEV now don't want another one. People are like, what are we going to do with this stupid car? They're not happy with the performance cars. They're not happy with this increased CO2 from their Escalades, but they don't like the BEVs. They're not crazy about hybrids either, though they're coming around. Also, you have the rise of self-driving cars. That gives you more screen time, but the self-driving cars are hitting people, and they're not perfect, and they kind of suck. I was in a self-driving car. Again, this is a period of unhappiness and chaos. Self-driving car in San Francisco, a guy gave me the finger. A lot of people looked at me. They didn't like that. So we
What,
have
because
already,
you're in a self-driving car?
they don't like self-driving cars. They're pissed off by them. Death of the performance internal combustion engine cars is happening already. Camaro's gone, Hellcat's gone, Challenger's gone. The V8 AMGs are going. The V8 M cars from BMW, they're all going away. Death of the big SUVs, I think, is coming soon. Probably death of the personal use pickups. And to round out my point about this is just the beginning. This is 1974, but we already have some weird cars. I would say the Tesla Model S Plaid is weird. The Cadillac Celestiq is $300,000 of nothing but weirdness. The Jaguar Waymo car is weird,
Yeah.
and there's more to come. So that is where we are. And I'm going to leave it there and open it up to you because I know you have thoughts.
Well, and I think you've set this thing up exactly. You've chiseled a wonderful sort of like historical retrospective of what happens, and we all, are probably stricken with the phrase now, but history repeats itself. If it doesn't repeat itself, at least it rhymes. And I'm going to pile on the weird stuff because when you were talking about the weird cars, I thought, well, yeah, well, there's a couple of them. And then I started thinking back to 1974. Well, no, there was more than a couple of them. Everybody was trying something new. The Pacer, like you said, was crazy, oddball, sort of desperate attempt. And there were many desperate attempts. The Mustang too was a desperate attempt. There were a lot of people who were just desperate. And now I'm going to go ahead and say another weird car, Hummer. Hummer as a reemerging brand is a weird car.
Yes.
Rivian as an attempt to sort of replicate and or be considered in the same sentence with the Tesla, and they're going under. How about Fisker? And the king of weirdness to me, and Tesla is never going to come out unscathed on this particular broadcast, the Cybertruck. That truck didn't even come out before it was criticized. And it's just, my wife, who is not, she's not car unaware by any stretch of the imagination. She saw her first one in traffic and said, that is the weirdest and ugliest vehicle I have ever seen in my life. And so, yeah, I think you're right. I think we are starting to see this echo effect. And if we look back at 74, which a lot of people would say, oh, that was kind of the beginning of the malaise era. One thing different to me, Steve, and I'd love to hear your point and or counterpoint on this, is that when we entered the malaise era back then, at least people sort of had like you said, people didn't know what they wanted, and then kind of quickly they knew what they did want, and what they wanted was exactly how you mentioned, German driving characteristics. They wanted better fuel economy. They wanted decent quality. Yeah, the Japanese cars delivered on a lot of those, but some of those other things were left out. But to me, right now, it seems like we're divided. Is it EV or not? Is it hybrid or not? Is it ICE or not? Are we doing alternative fuels or not? And to me, this division, these new tributaries of discord or dissent, depending, especially since you got flipped off in traffic in old peace, love, and brotherhood San Francisco in a self-driving vehicle. And now you look at the disinformation that's out there. EVs are good for the environment. Another side says, no, they're absolutely horrible for the environment. How about EVs must be the complete answer? No, they're not. How about autonomous driving is the answer? No, it's not. There is to me, there's no unified theory of where we want to go. And to me, that is bothersome. I see actually more discord coming in the future than I might have seen or pretended to see in the 74 forward period. What are your thoughts?
I think that's a really good point. There was not unanimity in 1974, but people were generally unhappy and generally agreed, number one, and I'll make these points again because I think they're important. Number one, we need to decrease tailpipe emissions. Cars polluted back then, and people wanted them to stop polluting, number one. Number two, with gas prices up, they wanted better gas mileage. Number three, they wanted the cars to be safer.
Yeah, yeah.
And that was really important.
Yeah.
So, and they wanted better quality as well, and that's a good point to make. But there wasn't there was disagreement because everyone was like generally unhappy and no one agreed on what the solution was. But they knew that they wanted those goals. And everyone was like, yeah, let's kind of move in that direction. Now there's, I would say, while there was disagreement back there, there was less polarization because
Yeah.
now the people that believe in SUVs are fucking into it. I mean, they are evangelists and they will brook no opposition.
Yep.
The people who don't like BEVs think they suck and they're stupid.
Yep. Yeah. I think that's right. I think you have like opposite corners of the ring of even where we're going. I mean, I've already greatly aired my personal opinions about this march toward full EV, BEV is just like the lemmings going over the cliff to me. I mean, yeah, there's a partial solution there, and there's parts of it that make sense, and there are understandable limitations to how that's going to be. But this, oh, well, the BEV is going to save us from ourselves and we're going to quit polluting. That is just completely false. And so I would be on that side of the ring. I would be in hyper opposition to the direction that it looks like people are going. And I guess right now it's like, what do we see? Like, what is our glimpse of the future for the automobile? Let me tie in kind of a minor point, but potentially it will rise in importance later as we get into this. Right now, I'm in my Brumos Porsche shirt here because I'm at the National PCA event, what they call the parade in Birmingham, Alabama. First time it's ever been here. And I thought, well, heck, it's darn near my backyard. I'll go. And between this and the last show that I went to at the Highlands Motoring Festival, I'm telling you, the enthusiasm for the automobile as a general thought of, oh, isn't this fun? Isn't this interesting and entertaining? Is down exactly like what you said with this whole screen time obsession, and people are just like addicted to their screens, and there's a lot more things to be entertaining other than the automobile. I wonder how much enthusiasm there will be in the future. I feel like that's one particular area, and I feel like that might lead toward a consolidation of either manufacturers that we've sort of said on this show before that are on the brink of going out, just because there's no interest. I mean, you can't find somebody 30 years old who has any sort of touch point with an Alfa Romeo being a fantastic vehicle or a Jaguar being a fantastic vehicle. And I think that's going to probably consolidate, or some people are going to slough off. I think submodels will probably slough off. And I'm interested to hear what you think is going to be coming. Like if we're repeating 74 to 84, what do you see happening in these next 10 years? What does your crystal ball look like?
I think in 20 to have a nice number that people talk about it, because this is the number people talk about where internal combustion engines go away 2035. Here's where I think we're going to be in 2035. I think cars will be self-driving, and I think that the self-driving aspect of cars will be very good and it'll be perfected. I didn't think that even a year ago, but after driving the Waymo, being in a Waymo, and realizing just how good the tech is now, like, oh my gosh, this is really, really good tech. I think the self-driving in 10 years is going to be the way most people get around. And I think it's going to be I think it's going to be BEV in 10 years. So I think that people will be in self-driving cars, maybe that fly with like the Joby pods.
Yeah.
That's possible. Although I think probably 10 years is too soon for that. I think they'll be in self-driving cars mostly. It's such a big change. I can't say mostly. I think a significant percentage of people will be, I think by 2035, we will know that your self-driving is coming soon. I think it'll probably take 20 years, but everyone will, just like we knew in 1984, there was a lot of crappy cars. A lot of cars didn't drive like German cars. A lot of cars didn't have Japanese quality, but we knew that's what we wanted. I think in 10 years, we're going to know we want electric cars and self-driving cars, but we won't be there. It'll take another 10 years, just like it took 10 years from 1984 to 1994. But we will know that that's what we want. And the reason I say that is I think we're going to have not the charging infrastructure. I think the charging infrastructure is kind of bogus. We'll have it, but that's not the thing. The thing that really has to happen is better batteries. And I do think we'll have better batteries by then. And if we don't, we'll have hydrogen or something in the car, maybe a tiny internal combustion engine, something that charges it. So it'll be a hybrid, but it'll be, now you get a hybrid, it's like mostly internal combustion with some electric. I think then it's going to be hybrid with mostly electric with this range extender that is really, really good. And I think we'll be at like 1,000 miles a charge because of either hydrogen or a small internal combustion engine charger. And I think the self-driving thing is going to be not there yet, but we'll know like, oh yeah, that's where I want to be.
Well, you would make a great Ferdinand Piëch. 1,000 miles between needing to charge, I think is incredible. I think that's a goal worthy of having. I'm telling you, I'm on an extended road trip, hitting a bunch of different cities, and one day I drove 8 or 9 hours, something kind of at the end of my particular range of driving, and we saw a handful. I don't know if it was 4, it could have been 6 EVs driving on the interstate with their flashers on and very distraught, anxious looking drivers scanning between the exits and looking at their remaining range. And I'm going to assume they were like dwindling charge numbers. And the full BEV to me is just an almost unsolvable problem. I feel like hybrid, exactly like you, but I tend to think some combination of gas, and since you can actually buy fuel at stations, that infrastructure is already there. I feel like that's, to me, that may be a short-term thing, but just the hybridization there is just an obvious card to play. If Porsche can pull off this synthetic fuel, what they call e-fuel, being tested now on the very lowest coast of South America, where it's constantly windy. So there are wind turbines that are driving without trying to go into the technology, which I kind of don't understand, but somehow they are able to convert water into a combustible fuel. And you will read online, oh no, that doesn't work for all. It only works for certain compressions. Porsche says it's going to work for everything. So I'm just going to go with
in
that.
World War II, Germany has like no oil. In World War II, they used labs to produce gasoline for their tanks. It's just organic chemistry.
Yep.
And you don't need to get petroleum out of the ground to make gasoline. And what they're doing there, the only thing that's different about it from World War II is they're using wind to make it, but it's the same processes that make petroleum. We can make gasoline. We can make gasoline without digging oil out of the ground. It's just a lot cheaper to dig the oil out of the ground. So anyway, yeah, it's just an interesting thing to think about. I would say this, and then before we move on, it just really, really feels like people are just like our current choices are getting worse. They kind of suck. And that's why I thought in 1974, because that's exactly what people thought in 1974. This is not progress to go from cool muscle cars to these wheezy cars that, yeah, they didn't pollute much, but they had no power. They had trouble starting. They didn't really get better gas mileage, although it was slightly better. And they just kind of sucked. And it just was lousy quality, lousy performance, terrible design. And I think that's where we are now. To give you an example, and before we move on, let me get your reaction to this. And this is what I talk about when I say cars suck. I cannot take credit for this. I don't know who said this, but who cares?
Let's attribute it to us. So
yeah, sure.
If it's smart, but if it's stupid, we'll say Stephan.
Stephan said it. And here was the quote. And I think, this is kind of the bottom line. This is why I think cars suck right now. If everybody had a 2024 battery electric vehicle, Tesla, Ford Lightning, Ford Mustang Mach-E, Rivian, or the one you mentioned earlier, the Fisker, okay? You take all the available, and everybody had that, and nobody had anything else. And then someone came along and said, hey, I've got this thing. You can get 450 miles, and you go to a gas station, you fill up with gas, and it's going to disrupt the industry. People would dump their BEVs for this new thing. Oh my gosh, internal combustion is so much better. You don't have to go 240 miles. You don't have to wait an hour to charge or 2 hours to charge. It takes 3 minutes to fill it up, and you can go 450 miles. This is incredible. See what I mean?
Yeah, yes, I do. Well, actually, yeah, and you can sort of do other things. You know, you fill it up and you just put the little clicker on, you can check your phone and do what you want. But yeah, that's a great point. If internal combustion were the new alternative, and I've said this before, and this is not exactly completely cogent, but I feel like if Dr. Wankel had been born before Carl Benz, I feel like we probably would be Wankel driven in our internal combustion. But what you're saying is a great point that if we were all BEV and somebody popped up with a Challenger or even a Honda Accord, it would be like, oh my gosh, that's what we all need to have. Yeah, I
People
completely
would flock over.
yeah, they would. They would. Well, I mean, you know, I will say like again before we jump off of this, I feel like now something horribly unpopular that we've mentioned on this show before about the subscription services, I'm afraid that is likely to become a more standard thing. I mean, I think the manufacturers are going to learn that they can self-consolidate, meaning that they don't need multiple platforms, they don't need multiple option packages and group A, B, C, and an ever higher pricing tier. I feel like they will make cars that are already fully equipped, but you're going to have to pay for the power seats. You're going to have to pay for the whatever it is that they decide to offer via subscription service. And I don't think when that first came out and everybody was ready just to send a lynch mob to BMW, who I think got the most popularized
You got the most hate.
got the most hate. Yeah, it was not famous, but infamous. And I think that's the one that got all the attention, but I feel like that's going to keep resurging. I think that that's going to become more sort of accepted and people will understand. And you pay for a car, but you only have a decontented subscription to certain aspects of it. I feel like that's probably coming. I also feel like there's more connectivity overall. The what do they call it? The OTA, over the air
Yeah.
upgrades, like what Tesla
Yeah.
does. I have a friend who is mobility challenged. He is the absolute perfect customer for Tesla you've ever seen because he could put on the most autonomous selections and he can actually drive his car. There was an upgrade. He did an over-the-air upgrade or a package that was a better software. Boom, he doesn't have to go to the dealership to do it. I think that is super cool. I think that's going to happen.
By the
And
way, I mean, just to your point, and I think you're absolutely right, Adams. I mean, subscription services, just by definition, there's nothing wrong with it. For example, you know what kind of sucks? Having CDs and you got to drag them around. You got to put them in your visor and they're home and you got to put them in you got to have them and you got to have a place to play them. That kind of sucks compared to subscriptions. Subscriptions are great. Spotify, you pay by the month
yeah,
and you can play anything you want, anywhere you want. You don't need to carry around the CDs. Nothing wrong with subscriptions. Just
yeah,
as long as it's an improvement.
yep, yep. So I feel like people sort of pushed back because they were thinking in terms of hardware, not software. But I feel like that's coming.
Yeah, well, I can live with that.
Yeah,
All
yeah.
right. Before we talk about Highlands, and I do want to hear about some of, it's nice to look back and say, listen, yeah, we're in this period of chaos, and a lot of what we're looking at sucks, and it's a little bit dystopian. But what's not dystopian is looking at cool old cars, which you did. Before we do that, I want to pick your brain. I just thought of this because you're at the PCA. New 911 was introduced, 991, 9, I'm sorry, 992.2, a little bit controversial. Adams, talk about that from your perspective there at the PCA.
With the hybrid,
Well, just everything about the new 911, because as you know, there's a few areas of controversy, and I know you know about it. So I know I'm putting you on the spot, but who cares? This is something. This is right up your alley since you're at the Porsche Club of America meeting.
I tell you what, I'm going to turn it on you because I'll set it up and I want you to respond to the controversial parts because what I saw here, and this to me interesting, this first parade I've ever been to, if I didn't already say that. And there were probably first day at the Concours. I'm going to be wrong here, but I'm going to say 250, 300 cars. And these are cars that people have fawned over. There's every variety of 356, every variety of 911 from the soft window target and 3-gauge cars all the way up to the last G bodies. And, you know, that was a class. And then it was to the water cool stuff. And it was just unbelievable. I mean, just a tremendous array, just like you would think. And people are quite literally at the Q-tip level of cleanliness with these cars. It's a thing to watch.
That's where you live.
What's that?
That's where you live.
Well,
your cars are awesome.
You know, but you know, to a degree, but then, and thank you for saying that, but then I looked at the level that these cars were, you know, the cleanliness level and the detail level. And, you know, I wouldn't be so scrutineering about, oh, you know, that particular screw was originally black phosphate instead of anodine. I mean, that is so far out of my scope, but within the Concours, it is dead within, and you will get dinged a point for that. You'll get dinged a point for missing a tool. You get dinged a point if there's dirt up under your battery tray where you would always expect to see dirt. Anyway, my big long-winded buildup is that of those 350 whatever cars, about 70%-ish were 911s. You know, there was, I think I saw 2 944s and 2 928s and a bunch of 356s. There were several Boxsters. You know, they're over there. You know, Boxsters are now a classic car. There were Caymans, but for the large part, that Peter Schutz, your namesake, your familial point, which I would imagine y'all are related somehow, that car, when he said this car is going to keep on forever, that is the one that is still, to me, the heartbeat of Porsche. So when they do the 992.2 and they do these things to it, Steve, take it away.
You're supposed to answer the question.
Well, I figured I would give the historical background because, you know, I mean, you know, what's happening with the 911, I think it has struck a nerve. And I think people are a little bit up in arms. They don't know what to think about it. So
I think, you know, everybody, I'm going to speak for myself. I understand that it has to evolve. When it went from air-cooled to water-cooled in 1998, I understood that. It's got to do it. You know, they took air-cooled as far as they could take it, and it was going to be water-cooled. That's fine. Engines in the back, manual transmission, 5 gauges, no problem. And it evolved, and it got bigger in the 991 generation. That was controversial because it was a lot bigger than the 997 and became more of a touring car, even though it's a very, very fast touring car. It's really a touring car and less nimble. And weight-wise, they've done a pretty good job of keeping the weight down, but it's bigger, it's heavier, and it's more of a touring car. So that was controversial, but it still maintained its essence as a 911. I think the new one maintains its essence as a 911. It's basically the same car as a 992, but there were some changes that I don't like. And I'm not going to go to the hybrid system because the hybrid system doesn't really bother me that much. I don't understand. They went from 3 for the GTS. They went from 3 liters to 3.6. Very little increase in power. There's a hybrid. Even with the hybrid, it doesn't give you that much more power. There is more power, more torque, but I just don't understand why they changed the engine to a bigger engine. I mean, same engine, but just bigger. I don't understand that. But forget about that. Here's what bothers me, because this is gratuitous. There was no reason for them to do it. I have a 992. I love that it has a central analog tack, and you focus on that. And 911, since 1963, when they introduced at the Frankfurt Auto Show, the first 911 called the 901 had a central tack, and it's had a central analog tack ever since. And they made it digital. They didn't need to do that. They could have left it the way it was. And yeah, now it's configurable and all this kind of stuff. You know why it's configurable? So you can get the tack away and put a map there instead. That's not progress. They should have left an analog tack, because a tack should always be front. You should never be allowed to get rid of the tack. Number 2, twisting the engine, the key on the left. And they went, and the key went away, and they said, all right, there's no more key. It's keyless entry, just like everything, but you get it. Unlike most cars, you don't push a button like a Lamborghini or Mercedes or a BMW. You turn something that's like a key. That's how you start the engine, which is the way it was in 1963. On the left side, you turn it, and now it's a push button.
Yep.
Both those things are gratuitous, and they change
Yep.
it. That's what I don't like.
I don't like that either, and I'm glad you mentioned it. I didn't know if you wanted to go down the hybrid road, but both of those things bothered me. And I think there's also another pretty decent a very decent podcast known as Renthusiast, and he didn't love the digitizing of the gauge cluster either. And I'll tell you, it was interesting. Not terribly long ago, I pulled up to a restaurant to in my Cayenne GTS. I mean, so just like a normal car, but it's my Porsche that I have now. And the valet who I know comes in and goes, man, he goes, I always forget that the key is on the left side. And I said, yeah. And he goes, why is that? It was fun to retell that story because there's a historic sort of point of interest. And he was like, wow, I did not know that. Now I get it. Wow, that's cool. See, this guy's like 22 years
Well,
old.
tell the story. Why is it on the left?
Well,
I've got a point to make after this, but why is it on the left?
as the story goes, and it's been refuted, but I do not believe the refutation of it because I was reading the books about it that were published. I wasn't reading them in 1965 or 67. That's what I was reading. Okay. It's on the left because at the typical and the earliest of the Le Mans starts, it was a foot race between the drivers, and everybody's seen the old grainy black and white.
This is the 24 hours of Le Mans race, the 24-hour race.
24-hour race where the drivers are lined up across the track, opposite the track from their particular car. So if they're the Aston Martin driver, boom, they're aimed at their Aston Martin, etc. So everybody's lined up at their car. They fire the gun. The drivers run across the track. Everybody's seen that start, but that's how this was. It was a foot race across the track. Get in your car, shut the door, get your lap belt on, start the car, slam it in first, and go. Well, Porsche figured out kind of quickly that you would waste a quarter second, which is like a lot of time in a race, especially to try to grab the pole position, to start the car with your right hand key and jam the gear into first with the same right hand. Porsche went, aha, these people do have two hands. Let's start it with the left hand, jam it into first with the right hand. Boom, we're off. And that quarter second, half second was critical.
Yeah, that's the story. And it's maintained in Porsche now. And I think it belongs there in the 911 because it's always been there in the 911. But you know this as well as I do. Where do you think the key was in the 928? Where do you think the key was in the 944? Where do you think the key was in the 944 Turbo? What do you think the 924 Carrera GT? Where do you think the key was? Right side. So they have not been consistent in this.
They have, I didn't even realize that with the Carrera GT. I've seen too few of them, but that's right because I've had a number of 944s, 968s, 928s. Yeah, they were right side. But
yes, they were. I know. So they're like,
why the truck has it on the left? I don't know.
Come on, man. If you did it for the 944 Turbo can have the key on the right, the Cayenne can have the key on the right.
Yeah. They probably should have, but that's one of the coolest things about that car.
So, all right, let's move on from the 911 and just say, give us a quick rundown of the Highlands and then we'll quit. But I'm going to set you up on this because this is a boutique. This is almost like Patek Philippe of car shows. Really high quality. You have to know where it is and what it is. And this is not a lot of people show up. Not a lot of cars are there, but this is top shelf.
This really is. And it's one of those things. It's like the news is so good about that particular show. It's kind of like when we had young children and we would go through several babysitters to find one who was actually good, who would show up, who was reasonable and responsible. You were at first were excited to share that news. And then you're like, I don't need to tell too many people because then I can't get them. And this automobile show is like, I'm going to just throw this out there. It's like Amelia Island was probably when it first started, not as grand, I'll give it that. I mean, Bill Warner, who was actually the MC of this last Highlands Motoring Festival. Bill Warner was the spokesperson there. But it started off with maybe a less grand overall idea, but man, it is super high quality stuff. There's probably 80-ish cars in it. You can walk right up to them. You can talk to the owner. There might be a little bit more than that, but there's certainly not 100 cars, I wouldn't think. And it's very high quality stuff. They have a good theme. This year was a little bit oddball. This is not a criticism. It's just something that would be like, it wouldn't have occurred to me. It was brass era cars.
Wow.
So if you talk about
basically pre-war.
Oh, indeed, indeed. Big cars, big radiators taller than an old 911 is from the ground to the roof. And that was an interesting pick, and it might be the last time they do that. I don't think there was a tremendous amount of interest in those. I think people looked at them like, wow, did they roll that out of the Smithsonian parking lot? Because they almost don't look like cars. They don't act like cars. They don't crank like cars. They don't sound like cars that we are normally associated with. But aside from that, which was kind of interesting, lots of 80s and 70s, 80s, and 90s stuff. And, 275 GTB4 Ferrari, a Carrera GT actually was there. 507, the old 507 BMW, all the way up to the 328 Bantam BMW. If you want to look that up, that was a crazy little car. Not the modern 328, but there were a lot of fun automobiles there, and it's a very casual crowd. But I will say there was more gray hair than there was the color people were born with, and I think that's just part of what we're seeing.
Yeah, and the roads around there are great, right?
Oh my gosh. It is like if you taped a pencil to an anaconda and just let it go. That's those roads, they switch back on themselves, and most of them are very good quality roads. I mean, yeah, there's some crumbly edges, but I'm saying for the most part, and I don't know when the maintenance crews are out, because these are narrow roads, a lot of them. I mean, they're 2-lane, but it's not like they're not 4-lane where a road crew can be on one side and you can still get by them. And there's switchbacks and there's bank turns, and if you see 15 miles an hour on a sign, they mean it. It's some of the funnest driving roads in North America.
All right. Well, thanks for that. I'm going to go to that. I'm not really psyched to go to Amelia Island because of the crowds, just like I went to Pebble Beach once. I have no real desire to go back because of the crowds and where you're going to stay and that kind of stuff. But Highlands, yes. Highlands I would like to do. So
I heard promise in your voice there. I heard that you're thinking about it, and that's what's attractive about it. It's not that crowded.
I wouldn't dream of going without you, so I'm psyched. Let's plan on it.
Okay.
All right, Stephan, Dr. Moran, we miss you. Trauma surgeon will be back next time. Again, we're every 2 weeks now, and this was great. Adams, thanks for taking the time. So listen, like, subscribe, hit the bell. Goodbye.
Thank you, folks.